or afternoon, depending on where you are joining us. Thank you for holding, and welcome to today's Cloud Services Community webinar. Our topic for today is how the cloud has changed the game as a service or as a utility. All phone lines are in a listen-only mode, and later there will be a question and answer session with instructions being given at that time. You may also ask a question at any time using the chat window located in the control panel. Chat questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's session is being recorded, and you will be provided a copy of today's materials following the call. Now, let me introduce our expert speaker for today's webinar. Scott Fluge joined JDL Technologies in 2011 as Vice President and General Manager and was promoted to President and General Manager in September 2013 as part of an overall management restructuring to the parent company, Communication Systems, Inc. JDL Technologies provides information technology solutions, including managed IT services, to the 4th and 6th largest public school systems in the U.S., as well as to a broad spectrum of businesses in South Florida. The company was founded in Fort Lauderdale, Florida more than 15 years ago. In his executive role at JDL Technologies, Mr. Fluge leverages his exceptional skills in strategic planning, business development, and customer relationship management with the objective of expanding the business throughout Florida and the Southeast. Prior to joining JDL Technologies, Mr. Fluge served as Chief Information Officer and Senior Vice President of Operations for GSS America, GSS Infotech, a public company, where he was responsible for building market-leading software products and global service delivery channels, leveraging outsourcing and blended shore strategies. Prior to that, Mr. Fluge was Director of Development for InfoSpectrum Consulting, a global software product development and technology services enterprise. Through his unique combination of project management and talent management skills, he helped develop the company from a team of 2 to a $15 million organization in just 6 years. Scott holds a Master's in Management Information Systems from the University of Wisconsin and has earned ITIL V2 Foundation and Trainer certifications. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and turn this over to Scott.
I really hope we recorded that because I think I want to have that played back for my mom. That makes me feel really good about myself.
Oh, well, thank you.
Other people describe your own bio for you. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. One of the things I'd like to do right before we get started is to release a couple of poll questions because it'll help me to make sure that I tailor some of these slides specific to the audience. So if we could start with that.
Absolutely. All right. First of all, do you sell cloud services now? Please select 1, yes or no. And we'll give everyone a second or two to go ahead and vote.
Again, there is method to the madness. There's a reason behind the question. So.
All right, we'll give them about another 4 or 5 seconds to get those last-minute votes in. All right, the poll is now closed. We have 60% saying yes and 40% saying no.
Great. Okay, and then there's, for that 60%, there's one more follow-up question. And that was the second poll.
Of those selling cloud, do you host your own cloud environment? Again, please select 1, yes or no, and we'll give attendees a couple of seconds to get their votes in.
While we're waiting for that, when I was first asked to present this topic, it was a couple of months ago, and the first time around, the audience was a little bit different. The audience for that presentation was really the channel community, those that we as providers turn to get the technology, the tools, the software, the hardware that we then in turn serve out to the client. So that had a slightly different angle as to how cloud has changed the game for organizations like us. This time around, the audience is more the other providers, peers like my company who are providing these services then out to the end customers. Surprisingly, most of the information is the same across, but it has a slightly different flavor to it, certainly different concern points, and different things that we might be looking for as peers than we are as we discuss with our providers. So I wanted to get a feel from this audience, who has already gone through this journey, who is just at the beginning of it, and who might be at the end. So again, I can tailor my questions to those results.
Okay, well, we did close the poll, and of those selling the cloud, 20% are hosting their own cloud environment, and 80% are not.
Okay. So as we go back to the presentation, so I'm presenting on how the cloud has changed the game specific to my organization, whether that be an as-a-service or an as-a-utility model. And I'll describe what that means a little bit more in a bit. But at a high level, the as-a-service is more providing somebody else's branded cloud, which you may white label or resell as their brand, versus the as-a-utility, which tends to be more of the private labeled cloud or your own infrastructure then pushed out as a cloud environment. But aside from the bio you heard of me as an individual, who is JDL to be talking about this particular topic? And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just so you know, the organization itself was founded in 1995 as a typical VAR. We had one major client in South Florida, that was the Broward School District, formed by two people in a trunk, and they were selling hardware and software services to that school district, and it kind of grew up from there. Since that time, we're now at 65 team members. We have over 60 active clients. We are working out of 18 states currently, doing everything from those same services that we provided originally, and then through the natural growth that we'll talk about in a bit, also moved into a managed services offering as well, and that's where we're spending most of our time trying to grow that particular piece of the business out. Along the way, we've gone through some certifications and evaluations to make sure that that what we're building and what we're providing is recognized as serving the needs of our client base, and provide these certifications for new customers to know that we've gone through our paces. So without going back to the beginning, how did we get there? How do we become who we are today? And what do I think a lot of you have gone through yourselves? Most of us, especially if we started in the 90s, started out as your typical VAR, value-added reseller. And by that, I mean you chose a technology stack, you breathed it, you lived it, you wore their logoed shirts, you went on two-headed sales teams with the people from those organizations, and that was how you branded yourself. Whether you selected EMC or Microsoft, Dell, Cisco, didn't matter. You chose what you felt was going to be the product that would launch you to your clients. Completely different model than what we're looking at today. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, that was the way it went. You would then take that message to the IT solution provider or service provider at the client base, whether that be the CIO or the CTO, the decision maker within IT. They too were often shirt-carrying members of that same crowd. So if you were talking to customer ABC, they were already a Dell shop or an HP shop or an EMC shop, and so they were on the same page with you. They too understood the value of the product that you were selling. They understood the speeds and feeds. They would often get into dialogues with you about back in the day, all the punch card discussions we had with our technical brethren at the client site. They could talk about different model numbers. That really kind of shifted as the technology became more and more complex. That was a part of it. But I think the big shift really came with virtualization once that became accepted at the production level. And what that allowed is for IT decision-making to leave IT. Pretty soon in the mid-2000s, we started having customers making decisions on need based on application requirements. So now somebody from the finance division who was looking at a new ERP rollout would talk about needing another virtual server. I need certain speeds and feeds. They couldn't care less what it was running on. They didn't know if it was an EMC platform or if they were running on Dell or HP equipment in the back end. All they knew is that they needed a virtual server with this much memory and this much disk. Once you started taking that discussion outside of IT, you started to derail some of the relationships that we had and some of the requirements that we had as providers and some of the messaging that we did. And it kind of changed the game. And it took IT from being something in the purview of the IT department and very misunderstood by the rest of the department and the company, and really turned it into a utility. where they just wanted to flip the switch and it would be there. They got very accustomed to understanding that if I request this new virtual platform, I could have it in a day. I didn't have to go out to bid. I didn't have to wait for something to be provisioned and built and turned up on the data center. It was really IT on demand. And the requirements of the IT departments themselves, of course, went through a corresponding shift as well. So, looking at that journey, how do we go from VAR to MSP? Well, starting out again as the VAR, we typically sold to customers who had on-premise IT. They ran their own data centers. Most of their staff were also typically in that same physical location or campus. As a VAR, our sales focus was on hardware sales primarily. That was where we had a very strong margin. Software sales secondary to that, and then follow that up with professional services to implement it. As the IT became more and more complex, the professional services requirement became harder and harder to satisfy, meaning we had to have more and more resources with varying degrees of skill set in order to answer the needs around those services, especially as our client base tended to be fairly broad, which brought up the challenge what to do with those resources while they're benched. That's the constant game that we played prior to the MSP business. If I had 10 resources and I was only getting 50% utilization out of them, I'd be losing money. I had to get to a 70% utilization rate in order to be proficient. With the technology changing and with a lot of the decisions rolling out of IT into the other departments, and with the IT landscape becoming more and more complex, our business partners or our customers, again, as I mentioned before, also kind of went through a shift where the large companies had strong enough IT staff to constantly stay up to date and to move with the times as the technology itself changed. The small, mid-sized businesses couldn't keep up. Introducing virtualization and all the various platforms for that, introducing the complex storage environments that we have, Linux coming into play within the corporate environment, all of that added more and more complexity to a small and overworked IT staff. And so they started turning more and more to the providers of those tools for service. And what started out as professional services really morphed into managed services from the customer's perspective and a way for us to ensure revenue from the provider standpoint. Around the mid-2000s was when it really kind of kicked in for us in our organization. And we realized that if we were to focus on providing the service and less on the IT, we could sell to a wider community within the client organization. Because if we went to a finance decision maker who was just worried about the new ERP rollout and talked about HP versus Dell, we lost them. If we talked about the ability to provide that service to, on a retainer basis, manage their databases, manage their ERP, manage their applications, suddenly that message resonated a whole lot more for them, and we had a lot more traction within the organization. If I had the choice of selling a $20,000 professional services engagement or a $2,000 per month managed service agreement for 3 years, the managed service agreement won out hands down. Even though the monthly revenue for it was less, the long-term impact for my organization was much greater, could be served across multiple resources, and would give me guaranteed revenue month on month. The sales focus, though, also went through a change. So where before we were focused on hardware, software, and professional services, now we start the sales focus on IT managed service, so leading with that as the primary. By leading with that, we still found we get a significant pull-through on hardware, software, and professional services. And this is still while it was an on-premise solution. So if we're managing the environment for the customer, they're still going to turn to us for any of the hardware, software, or professional services requirements on top of the services we're already providing as their MSP. Then in the 2000, really for us in the 2008 to 2010 timeframe is where we really started to see the next shift, which was cloud. I mean, cloud started even before that, but it's really starting to come into its heyday now, where it's every company is looking at some degree of strategy around it. But in 2008 to 2010 is when we first started really seeing it within our clients, and that's really the new paradigm or the new shift for providers like ours, where that same MSP is now being asked to provide services that include the IT component itself, where before the customer wanted to have all that stuff in-premise or on-site or in their control, now and more they're looking to have that provided remotely for them. as that decision-making process left IT for some of the IT requirements, it made a logical opening for the entire service to then be provisioned externally. But with that hybrid model of cloud service and MSP, there's still two real models for that to be delivered on. One would be in what would have been, on the hardware side, a typical VAR model, and that's a cloud providing MSP that provides the ready-made cloud services of others, whether that be the Amazon cloud, the Azure cloud, Google cloud, Rackspace, whatever. Choose your flavor, but take an existing IT infrastructure that's provided remotely in a cloud environment and sell that to your customer base, where you're the true blue card-carrying member of that hosted platform. And it has its strengths and weaknesses, which we'll discuss in a moment. The other option is to build it yourself. Build your own cloud infrastructure and provide that out to customers. We do both in our current environment here. We have some customers where we're providing it as a private cloud, and others where we do it in the VAR model. But for us specifically, our preference and the way that we've gone, and 20% of the respondents on this poll lab as well, is to go with a private cloud. So what are the big differences between the two? The VAR model is certainly the easiest to enter because the infrastructure already exists. There's already plenty of branding. There's already name recognition behind it, which makes it easier to sell in some cases. You don't have to have the capital investment to build up that environment. There's already support within those organizations if that goes beyond your own team's ability to support that infrastructure, whether you need advanced support in database administration or some of the Microsoft stacks and that type of thing. That's all readily available. What are the advantages on the private cloud? Ultimately, control and customization, as well as costing. The cost to our client, we're able to keep lower on the more complex environments in our own hosted environment. We're also able to secure it better because it is ultimately within our control. It answers some of the privacy concerns our clients have. They do have a lot of concern if they go into a very public cloud on how would they retrieve their data, should they want to leave it, how they make sure that nobody else can see it. So it answers a lot of that privacy control as well. Some of the disadvantages of either, well, certainly the private cloud has the disadvantage of having to build it. There's a large capital outlay required to build a proper environment, and you're doing that before you even have any customers. So there is a true investment on behalf of the MSP in that case. And to do it right is also very challenging, to ensure that within the technology space that you serve and the technicians that you have enough understanding to build a fully redundant, fully available 999 minimum environment in a hosted platform that will scale to the customer's needs, that will provide the speeds and feeds that they require based on their particular technology stacks. While that same thing is also an advantage based on the customer's needs, you can tailor your IT to their needs. It becomes a challenge as well in the having provision of it. The biggest challenge I see in the VAR model is obsolescence, and that's where the big concern is for me as a provider. Right now, all of those cloud providers also have managed service divisions, and there is a strong concern that outside of the relationship I have with the end customer, more and more the Microsofts and Googles and Amazons of the world will become a threat to me within that same customer base as they strive to provide the same services that I do, and it's already on their infrastructure. But in either case, whichever way you're going, your sales focus under a cloud MSP model is going to first center around IT managed services first. You're managing a need. You're providing a service independent of the compute platform that it's riding on. You have to make the determination if it's going to be public versus private cloud. It brings up a whole host of as-a-service offerings. Within our own catalog now, we're offering everything from compute as a service, of course, regular infrastructure as a service, network as a service, firewalls as a service, storage as a service, backup as a service. Pretty much anything that IT can deliver, we can piecemeal that out and provide that as one-off services or separate line items on our line card to our client base. And still, we find that with all of that, even if we move a customer to the cloud in near entirety, there is still a lot of pull-through sales on hardware, software, and professional services. Everything from the endpoint devices in their offices, desktops, laptops, printers, some compute still remains often in larger organizations, even that have gone cloud, whether that be domain controllers, VPN systems, local file repositories, things like that. And of course, software and then professional services engagements on top of that. The more and more they rely on us as an MSP, cloud or not, the more and more they require additional professional services as new projects and products become available to them. During that shift, it hasn't just been our service offerings that have changed. Our entire business models have changed as a result of that. A big piece of that, of course, is the approach to sales and marketing. When you started on this journey, we were in typical VAR model, then we moved, as I said, to MSP, to a hybrid cloud. While we were under the VAR model, again, we were product focused, so we were leading with those physical devices, the HP, the EMC, what have you. We were somewhat vertical agnostic. Everybody needs IT. Every business requires server, storage, and network. You didn't have to be a specialist within a practice in order to sell the next storage array. We had shorter sales cycles. We were responding to customer need. We weren't driving the need. We were responding to the need. So the sales cycles tended to be short. The margins were low. We were operating on, in the hardware field, you're often operating on 10% or much less on hardware. Sometimes we do it at 2%. We've even done some opportunities, even fairly recently, at 0% margin, counting on back-end rebates to make our money off of that. Hard to get rich doing that, but it's something that you often have to do to stay relevant. But then it has a much higher transaction count, so I don't mind doing some lower margin opportunities as long as I do enough of them to make up the difference. Marketing at that time, if it existed at all, was tied to vendor-supplied campaigns. So EMC would give us great literature, great marketing campaigns. They'd give calling lists out to us that we could use right off the bat. They would give us slicks that we could send out to the customers and put on our websites. And that was really what marketing was focused on, just promoting those opportunities that our specific and named vendors provided to us. And often those same vendors provided the leads themselves to their own marketing agencies. When you move to the MSP model and you're focused on a service, not a technology, suddenly you lose some of that, that vendor-supplied sales and marketing effort. So now sales had to become service-focused. Well, that's a completely different type of animal, where you could take just about anybody who has a sales acumen and teach them about a product to sell. The same isn't quite true for service-focused selling. It has to be much more consultative. They have to be able to talk about the business and understand the business pains, which means they had to be much more verticalized. You had to be able to go to a healthcare practitioner and talk about the IT needs specific to healthcare to really generate that trust that your solution and that your services would address it. Because of that, and because you have to drive the need as much as you're answering to the need, it has a much longer sales cycle. It does tend to lead to much higher margins on the opportunity level itself with a lower transaction count. The best thing for us, though, is the fact that it's recurring revenue. Once you sign that opportunity, unless you mess it up, with some exception, you pretty much have that guaranteed revenue month on month, year on year, in perpetuity. So that $2,000 a month opportunity, while low in its individual value, its annual aggregate is much higher. And it gives you that platform to leverage in year 2, year 3, and year 4. When we first started ourselves, we started out, of course, at $0 in managed services. By the end of our first year, we were at $300,000 a year. By the end of the second year doing this, we were at $700,000. At the end of year 3, we were at over $1.5 million doing it, and we're more than doubling in the years since then as well. So it's been a more than doubling event for us on just managed services recurring revenue, which is great because on a fixed bid, on a product sale, you spend a significant amount of time garnering the sale, and then you start over from scratch the next month, where with managed services we don't have that same issue. Now that we look at a hybrid cloud model, it tends to blend both of them. So you still have the service focus that we had under MSP, but now we bring in some product focus around the cloud solution that we've chosen and try to leverage some of the brand recognition that cloud provider has if we're using a public cloud in order to do that. We still have very vertical specific requirements, longer sales cycles, consultative sale, and potential high margin. Higher if it's private cloud than public, but still high margin capability there. Marketing in both the MSP and the hybrid model is where we've seen another significant change. On the marketing front, we had to develop, and this happened to my own business itself in the mid-2000s when we stopped doing VAR and started focusing on services and managed services. We had to build a personal brand. We had to make sure that the customers recognized who we were and that we were leaders in service providing within the niches that we served. And that's a very long and slow effort to build that brand up. We had to educate our customers on what managed services was, why it was safe, why it was important, why they could trust not just us, but the process itself. And that continues on even in the cloud model. In the cloud model, it has its own challenges, where at least before, when it was managed services on-prem, they still had ultimate control of their hardware and software. And if they didn't like us, they knew they could ask us to leave and they could hire people themselves. Once you start moving the technology outside of their office space, it becomes, very cloud-like. I can't really define its boundaries. I don't know exactly where it's at. I know it's someplace up above me, and I can sort of see it if I look for it, but I don't have any direct control over it. That's a very fearful point for most companies to be in, and so there's a lot of education, a lot of relationship building in order to make that work. So what has that meant for us as providers? Well, when you look at that from a pre-cloud standpoint, we were VAR-focused. After the cloud, we're service-focused. We used to be identified by the technology that we served, so we were the EMC shop, we were the Dell shop. Now we're identified by the service or the vertical we serve. So my own company is identified as an IT service provider or managed service provider for the healthcare space. There's no bearing at all on the technology stack that we provide that on. We used to resell the vendor brands. We spent a lot of time training our people on those different technologies and putting their logos all over our websites and really driving the interest based on that information, where now we spend our time defining our own brand, whether that be by standard drip marketing campaigns, going out and meeting people, going to the various certification bodies for managed services and making sure that we're recognized by them as being certified providers of these services, that type of thing. We used to sell based on client wants. So the client knew that they needed a new storage array, they needed a new compute platform, they needed to update their network. They almost came to us saying, this is exactly what I need. Here's the bill of materials that I want you to price out. Now we're selling based on what the client needs. The client needs a solution to host their new application. They need to get to an off-site location for their IT in order to be more secure. They need to respond to HIPAA compliance within the healthcare environment. They need a new solution to allow them to move to an EMR. They don't know what they need to do to get there. They just know that there's an ultimate need. So now we have to figure out what solution provides the best response to that need. We used to leverage our supplier pre-sale, and that was where I mentioned we had the two-headed sales team, where we would have a sales guy go in with one of our product vendors, engineers, and do a dog and pony show, to do a whiteboard, to talk about the product, and we would sell them just as much as they were selling us to that client. Where now, in a cloud model, we tend to leverage the supplier more post-sale. Instead of talking to our customers, we use them to educate ourselves, to train up our own teams, to provide on-the-job or on-site training and consultation, to vet solutions that we're developing on behalf of the customer that will be hosted in our platform, doing more of that type of work, less in front of the customer and more behind. We used to select the suppliers that we would resell based on their reputation, where now we tend to select them based on their capability and cost. It used to be more important to me to choose a vendor that was going to be recognized in the industry because I was selling based on that name. I was tying my brand to them or my name to theirs. Now, I don't necessarily even tell my customers what physical platform their environments are running on. We've got customers who have more than 200 users in our hosted virtual platform. They know it's Citrix, but they don't know anything about the underlying IT infrastructure, whether that were Dell, HP, EMC, Synology, or any of that. But what I care about is how I can get the best bang for my buck, how I can leverage the capability and cost of the infrastructure that I'm buying because my cloud is private, and turn that into a profitable venture for myself and a good service for my customers. How it's changed the relationship we carry with our provider. pre-cloud, again, we were worried about their own brand. We would go to the Gartner Magic Quadrant and look at, okay, who's leading in storage right now, and let's make sure that we're in the top right quadrant with whichever vendor that we select. And we would do that down the stack. Now, the provider brand is key. Our brand is key. So now we're looking at people who can validate our brand, whether that be things like CompTIA's MSP Trustmark or the MSP 500 and a whole host of other bodies that are out there now to validate and vindicate suppliers like us. We used to drive based on supplier-built demand. So, EMC would drive the demand in the community. I'm sure you all can remember all of the Think Big and IBM commercials that you'd see on primetime TV, because IBM was out there building demand for their products and services. You just don't see that much anymore. They're still out there, but not like they were before. Right now, it's really becoming something that we have to do ourselves. We provide and generate the awareness and demand for our goods and services, which tend to be more service-oriented than product-oriented. Or we were sold the vendor brand, now we sell our own brand, but include the powered by where needed. So if we really want to take advantage of the fact that we are on best-of-breed technology stacks, we'll tell the customer that we have our own private cloud environment that takes the best products of all the different industries, and it's powered by. So it's powered by EMC, or powered by Dell, or powered by HP. So what does that mean for us? What are we looking for from our vendors? First and foremost are cloud-friendly pricing models, and this is where the real challenge comes in if you're trying to provide your own hosted platform. There are some that do it well, some of the product providers out there, namely more on the software side than the hardware. So there are already service provider license agreement or SPLA agreements dedicated for cloud providers. Microsoft, VM, and Citrix are the three that I use the most, that enable us to resell their software services on an as-used basis. So Citrix, if I'm providing a virtualized desktop platform, I pay Citrix based on how many people logged in that month to my environment. And if I have 100 this month, I pay one fee. If 150 go in the next month, I just up it a bit. And if only 50 goes the month after that, my price goes down. I don't have to pre-purchase all that software based on future anticipated growth, which would break the bank in the first month while you're trying to build that out. Hardware is not exactly the same story. We're looking for cloud advantage pricing options, but they don't completely exist out there yet. HP has some plans out there now. They're one of the first that we're seeing in that marketplace. A couple of others are late in the game, but coming in. We have structured some agreements with some network providers that will give, at least in our case, they give JDL preferred pricing better than I can get for my customers as long as I'm owning the equipment. So when we're doing our wireless as a service, and even though we're putting access points in our clients' environments, we own the physical device. I can buy it at 60% off list, where the customer at best can get maybe 40% off list. So it gets a little bit better for us and allows us to compete. But what we're still looking for really are some additional as-a-service offerings to really round out. You'll see it a little bit already in things like SIP or VoIP as a service, managed print as a service, network and wireless as a service. But we need additional products and services to really round out the entire gambit of services that we can provide that are still going to be under our control. The moment we go out to the cloud providers and you look at Salesforce as a service and some of the others, you just lose a little bit of the stickiness of yourself within that organization. They're great solutions to the customer, but if they're not provided on your platform, you run the risk of that provider ultimately stepping in and providing a service that makes yours somewhat antiquated or obsolete. Just to kind of give you an idea of what that's meant for how we brand ourselves, at JDL we have three primary brands: our Health Tech brand, our TechWatch brand, or our EduTech. That's the verticalization that we've gone through, where we've chosen education and healthcare as our primary two go-to verticals, and we've developed cloud-based managed service solutions specific to those two industries, and we have our sales staff trained to understand the specific needs and desires of those two different business, very, very different business verticals. You can't do those things without running across a bunch of other opportunities, and while we may be fishing for marlin, if a bass jumps in the boat, I'm not going to throw it out. So we have a third brand there, just a generic tech watch to cover any other non-healthcare, non-education opportunity that comes into the boat. But instead of leading with the products that we serve, we're leading with ourselves. So we lead with the fact that we have a state-of-the-art managed service operations center, and we really sell that up, because one of the first things that we have to express and show to our customer is that they can trust us, that they can trust that we're looking at their environment even though we're not in it day in and day out. We're not sitting at a desk within their office. They have to trust that we are watching, monitoring, and able to see and respond to issues as they come up. Second to that, we give them performance-based SLAs. So we guarantee that we're going to perform whatever it is we say we're going to perform, that their environment is going to be up and available to whatever level we can promise it, depending on how much control of it we have. And then we put our money where our mouth is with money-back guarantees against those services that we provide. We've verticalized, as I mentioned before, so we talk about how we are the foremost provider of HIPAA-compliant IT services in Florida, which really resonates with our healthcare customers who are really struggling to meet the minimum use requirements that HIPAA's put in place, and are going through a bunch of challenges in the coming years around ICD-10 and some of the other things that are coming up. We do full solution offerings that are, again, product and vendor agnostic. So private or public cloud hosting, depending on the customer's sensitivities, a whole host of as-a-service solutions, industry-specific tailored solutions, and brand family across all the key verticals. None of that talks about the platform under which we provide those services. So how has the cloud changed the game for us, whether it's as a service or as a utility? I take a look at everything we provide and everything that you could provide, and it's kind of like a piece of pie, just a slice of pie, whether you're talking about a private cloud or a public cloud, professional services, hardware as a service, software as a service. All of those are just different pieces of pie that you choose to serve up. In my opinion, the cloud services are either a part of your pie, it's just one of those slices of the things that you offer, or perhaps it's all of your pie and you've gone all in with any one or a host of those different flavors. But the reality is, if it's not a piece or a whole, pretty soon you're not going to have any pie at all. And that, my friends, is the presentation I have for you. I'm open to take any questions, should anybody have any.
All right, thank you, Scott. We will open it up for questions now. We'll give people a couple seconds here to go ahead and write on in. All right, there's one that came through. What made you select a private cloud model instead of reselling the public cloud?
Okay, good question. There's a couple of different answers to that. One was somewhat selfish in that in the game that we were playing as a VAR, we amassed quite a bit of hardware, specifically around some storage solutions. So we found that we were sitting on several terabytes of storage in various, in our case it was HP left-hand storage array. And we were already getting into the managed services practice fairly well, and one of the first things our clients were looking for was a way of storing their information off-site as a secondary backup. And so it really became just a way for me to capitalize on the investment of hardware that I had from different NFRs and demo kits over the years, and I was able to put those in our data center and provide very cheap storage solutions as our first as-a-service offering. So for us, storage as a service was the very first thing we took to market. We also, as a service provider, specialized in virtualization, specifically Citrix, and we're looking to incorporate that for our managed services customers. And one of the things that we noticed within the public space, in the public cloud, is that while, yes, they could guarantee speeds and feeds, virtualization at the desktop layer has some unique requirements around the infrastructure layout. And by doing it in a private cloud, we have much more control over that environment, and we're able to provide faster serving IT infrastructures than what we could get from the public cloud opportunities that we had out there.
Excellent. All right, we do have one more question coming through, and remember, attendees, feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand button located in the control panel, or you can ask a question via chat in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So in the meantime, Scott, the next question, who are your main competitors?
Okay, who's my main competitor? Well, my main competitor at this point has grown from being a few people that we could recognize. You know, everybody in their environment knows who the other VARs are, and those used to be our main competitors. Now we have those same competitors, so the other VARs and MSPs in our region are our competitors, but now we've added competitors. It started with the other vendors themselves being competitors to us, whether that be the public cloud providers. If you're reselling Rackspace or Azure, they're also actively selling and engaging with potentially the same customers you are, so they become a competitor to us. Just about every product you sell, hardware or software at this point, has either already released or as a roadmap to release a managed services component to their solution. So now all of our existing providers, Dell, you go to Dell's website and try to buy a laptop, it comes with a managed services option right off the bat. HP, same thing. All of these as-a-service providers, whether that be Xerox with their print services and everything else, they all have a managed service component to them already. So that becomes our competitor. And most recently, we ourselves have become the competitor. So as we're looking at trying to provide a managed service cloud offering to a customer, one of the things they're going to ask is, well, what would it cost to buy it outright? So now you have to try to find a way of pricing an opportunity so that if they go through the exercise of taking your monthly cost for the cloud service and multiply it out by 24 or 36 or however many months that they would value an on-premise solution, you have to try to find a way of making that a win for them. And you have to be very careful in your pricing models in order to do that. In some cases, ourselves as the competitor are almost more painful to deal with than any of the external vendors, because I can't use the same kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD, that I might against a competitor. If I'm talking about a cloud-provided solution, public cloud versus private, it's much easier for me to talk about the advantages of my private cloud over that public cloud. But when I'm the public cloud or I'm building that same solution on that same hardware for them to own themselves, it's a little bit harder to pitch. And I can't certainly say anything negative about the provider of the other solution in that case.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott. I don't see any other questions coming in, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending.